really, it is the most extraordinary thing. If you spend just 2 seconds looking across the river, what you're looking at in Chelsea Flower Show is the world's horticultural event. It's the absolute pinnacle of my industry. I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud to be part of it. Doesn't mean I'm not very flippant about it. So what I thought I would do is really just give you an overview as to why I got involved with it, why somebody else might want to get involved with it, and some of the astounding facts and figures around it, which kind of are eye-watering. Also, I have the privilege of being invited to have become a judge. So I can tell you all about judging. And when you tell me that your favourite wasn't the judge's choice, because we don't have favourites, I will leave very quickly so I can still leave the building with my legs intact. So essentially, if we start with the kind of first question, why, then I'm going to ask you a few questions about it. So if you were to take the average Chelsea Flower Show, how many journalists do you think turn up in a given year? If I said 500, would you think that was amazing? You'd say, someone's saying more. If I say 3,000, that's quite an amazing figure. Actually more than 3,000 this year. So within that, you've got over 30 hours of BBC coverage. So that's something that money can't buy, which is quite appealing. You've got these people writing and broadcasting about it. So after the TV, that's just BBC, you have a television network from Australia this year. Well, he comes every year. But you have him this year again. You have television from France, from Germany and from America, all broadcasting about plants and flowers, which makes me very happy. But then you've got pure ticket sales. So how many people do you think arrive at Chelsea Flower Show in a given week? So this number, I'd love someone to shout a number at me, it'd be really good. But this number is 160,000 people. No. On average, Chelsea Flower Show sells out in December the year before. So this is possibly the most extraordinary event because you're guaranteed a sellout, you're guaranteed extraordinary coverage, and these people coming to the show are actually obsessive about what they're looking at. So I want you to imagine they've travelled here, they've looked around the show, they've watched it on television, but this isn't enough. So how many people, this is a lot of how manys, how many people do you think then scurry back home and go on to the RHS website to read about the gardens that they were looking at? So that'd be it is all of them, because the unique hits is 250,000 logging on to see what's happening. Then there's all this journalists. You remember I told you there are at least 3,000. Well, they've written quite a lot. But they're also on the radio. So how many hours of radio are there? It's over 30,000 hours of broadcast material from this place. And this doesn't even then include long-term, so traditional print format, which is coming out in a couple of months' time to tell us all about it again. So in that little nutshell, you can see a glimmer of why people that I would call investors, who are more commonly known at the moment as sponsors, would want to make a garden at Chelsea. Because the obvious thing is you've got a market which is, I hate to say it, traditionally ladies who are very savvy in what they're doing and love beautiful things, and their husbands who love making sure that that house is very beautiful. So they're very consumer aware, and these investors in the shows have realised that actually if I make a garden here, I can do an enormous amount of things. The first thing I can do is I can talk to my customers face to face, and I can do it in a setting where their guard's down a bit and they're a little bit more ready to listen to what I'm telling them that's new and exciting, and I've kind of absorbed them in this world of beauty, and I've said my core values are very similar to yours, so why don't we team up? But more than that, they were also able to say, well, I really wanted to do a deal with this other business, and every time I've gone there it's been really hard sell, and I've dragged them around everything I can possibly think of, apart from dragging them into the magical world of plants. And when I've done that, this amazing business deal has happened. So these investors making gardens really see a commercial benefit in making a garden at Chelsea, which may lead you on to the most obvious question: how much does it cost? So, would anyone, I may even stay silent until someone gives me a figure, Would anyone like to hazard a guess how much the average Chelsea Flower Show garden, so one of the big ones really, because that's the big numbers, how much one costs? This lady's wearing.
About 200 to 250,000.
How do you know that? Because I've just signed the cheque, so I know. She's right. The minimum is about £250,000. It can go up. Depends how much money you want to spend, how many big plants you want. So where does all that money go? Well, some of those designers have got the most amazing houses. No, that's not true. That is actually not true. So let's think about it. We are going back to how many's, but there are a lot of plants in a Chelsea Flower Show garden. They're grown by absolute specialists who are really passionate, and I'm going to demonstrate this to you. So if you take one of those gardens, they look like they've been there forever. That requires a huge volume. So if I said to you that in those gardens you're going to see 4,000 plants, would you think I were lying? Higher. Sometimes it's slightly higher. It's an extraordinary number. And in order to get them ready for the show, there's a huge amount of back work. So already the Royal Horticultural Society are typing up the application forms for next year, which sometimes is a little bit heartbreaking because we're still in love with the thing we've made, but we know we've got to make something else. So nurserymen are getting very excited because they're going to have these huge, vast orders. If I want 30 peonies in peak flower for the judges, the dreaded judges, then how many am I really going to be asking the nurserymen to grow for me? It's roughly about 200. And if I don't buy all 200 myself, then he's going to have to sell them on to somebody else to make a living, and all of a sudden you've got the most amazing trend. So I've ruined that for you. There are no such things as trend, it's just vast numbers of unique plants going into it. The average herbaceous perennial, beautifully grown for Chelsea, is about £20. So it kind of, when you next walk around a beautiful garden centre or a nursery and you think, golly, it's quite expensive for £7. It's actually really not expensive, and probably the tea and the coffee you have on the way home will cost more, but it would have cost the person growing it far less, because people loving plants are up to the middle of the night making sure these are beautiful things. So you've got lots of plants on trolleys, and if you ever get to see it during build, they are the most extraordinary Dutch trolleys. So ordinarily it's just shelves of metal and the plants are all on it, and it gets wheeled in very quickly and it gets put out for sale. But at Chelsea it's not quite like that. So depending on what you've got, they've got special shade blankets around them so they stay cool. If it's a very delicate flower, it's been wrapped literally in cotton wool with little sticks holding it all together. And sometimes if they're very tall plants and they're slightly fragile, you can only get 2 on a trolley. So you end up with gardens with like 60 trolleys around them with these shade nets and cotton wool and people agonising over what they're doing. That's one element. Of course, you'll know, even if you're not gardeners, that everything doesn't stop here in a garden. So you've got bigger things that you need to source and find. So averagely, a shrub takes a few years to grow. Where are you going to get a 10-year-old cornus? It's not an easy question to answer, but there are specialist nurseries for this kind of thing who just specialise in making, and well, making, they don't make, they grow, in growing mature plants. So that's another big expense. They could be £200 or £300. They could be a couple of £1,000. So you have those. The more unusual, the more wow, the more that it's going to seduce the journalist and show visitors, the more expensive it is, actually. So this is where this £250,000 is going. And then finally, before we even get on to anything else, because we're a plant show really, you've got the trees. So where would you even begin to start to find a 100-year-old oak which hasn't been in the ground for long enough for you to move it? And what kind of machinery do you need to do that? Because a large mature oak tree, we're talking about 6-7 tons. You're right on the limit of machinery you can hire easily, and with contractors who have the license for it. So you're talking about a major construction issue, but unlike construction here, we're really saying that the amount of space between each person is really, really small. They've got 3 metres between the gardens and they're both sharing it, and they're both trying to get a ginormous telehandler, and they've both got about 50 people on their garden, all trying to make sure nothing gets marked, blemished or damaged. So logistically, it's a nightmare, and I can tell you that the contractors who build these things have a very short career, because after 2 or 3 of these, they either have a meltdown and they're never seen again, or they're just insane. So you have all of this going on. These trees can cost anything up to and beyond £50,000. I'm quite excited this year because I decided foolishly, or maybe not, I decided to come back to Chelsea. I hadn't done it for a few years. And we found the most extraordinary mulberry, which has been pollarded. So it looks like a very elaborate stump, and it's hollow in the middle, and it has beautiful long stems, and it's 120 years old. So what I love about that is that not only has somebody 10 years ago thought this is going to be taken out of the ground, but because our vernacular horticulture doesn't allow for that to have happened, it's come from the continent to here, and it's been taken from the ground, put in one of these bizarre pots that looks like a colander that cuts the roots all the time with air, so it makes it very fibrous, makes it very water-based, and then it's been put into a steel cage so you can lift it with a crane and you can transport it. And the really important thing about this is it doesn't even know it's happening. So it's got its own little ecosystem, so it can be driven around. And we've even developed the most extraordinary way of moving mature hedges, because you can now buy a 12-foot, an 8-foot hedge, which is very thick, very substantial, and its roots are grown in such a way that it doesn't even need to go in the ground for up to a week, and it won't notice, and it won't wilt. So these are kind of extraordinary developments. They've all been pioneered by show gardens. So you've got all of this going on. Then you've got extraordinary technical manufacturing taking place. You've got people making beautiful screens, making bespoke furniture, making pavilions, trying to tell you this story of magic which will transport you from the heart of London to, in a given year, China, Japan, South Africa, Malaysia. If you walk around that show, you can almost see somebody or something from somewhere else. And that's the great celebration of horticulture. It's a universal language. It doesn't have boundaries. It doesn't have nationalities. What it actually has is just a shared knowledge which we've built our entire civilization on. And these gardens kind of represent that. So that's quite exciting. You've got all of this going on. You've got a slightly deranged person who's foolish enough to call themselves garden designer. And they have a very extraordinary role in this whole thing because they've met this sponsor who gladly wants to hand over £250,000, £500,000, who really wants this beautiful garden because they understand all of these amazing benefits, not only to their consumers, but to their business partners and relations. They've got this strange person they've never really met before. They don't talk the same language because garden designers don't understand baseline. What we understand is how to propagate some random plant that nobody's seen for 50 years. So they have a weird little meeting. They decide it's going to work. The garden designer then goes off with an abstract drawing, builds this thing out of love, asks 50 to 100 people over the course of a year to follow this journey and to say, look, believe in me because I'm going to create this picture that everybody's going to love. These people all put their heart and soul into it. And we have this thing that we say, if you don't leave Chelsea absolutely exhausted and feel like you need a week in a convent in a darkened room that's cool so you can just get your head back together, then frankly you've not done a very good job and don't come back. So they all do this. They're all merrily, well not merrily, they moan a lot. I take moaning to be a very good sign. So they're all moaningly doing it for you. They're all loving this. You find the most extraordinary people. So there's a lady that travels every year from Japan so that she can pick over, another designer's asters. And she'll stay, that she gets on her hands and knees in her little knee pads with these tiny little scissors, and she's like, every day for 8 hours. And she happily does it with no pay. It's quite extraordinary. You find people from New Zealand coming to do exactly the same thing. I'm not so elaborate, I bring a few ladies from the Cotswolds with me, but they come with really nice lunch, so that's quite handy. And often if I say something like, oh, it's quite hot, isn't it? They say, do you want a drink? Shall I go and get it for you? And I think, yes, because I'm really lazy. So it goes on like this extraordinary journey. And in between it, we now face the dread of technology. We're not always that good at it, of social media. So you spend 8 hours every day or more. We get there at 7, we leave at 7. If it's not going so well, we try and stay a bit later and blag it. But we do all of this, and then we have to trundle back in the most appalling looking mud-soaked clothes through Sloane Square, which you can imagine brings horror to the ordinary residents, thinking, who are these people? What are they doing here? So we trundle like this, knowing that when we get back, we've got a good hour where we've got to update Instagram, we've got to update Twitter, we've got to tell people how exciting it all is, and they really must come, and they really must follow this, and they really must like that. And then our PR agencies for our investor ring saying, well, what's happening that's unusual? Because so-and-so said this, and you need to say this. So you have this whole extra body of work, which is all around engagement, which is quite extraordinary. And then every now and then, your investor will ring and say, is it going okay? And you say, yes, it's all very good, knowing full well that you're on the brink of some awful disaster because something that you planned months ago hasn't arrived on the right date. Somebody's dropped something on their foot. It's all kind of like by a shoestring of tension. And then, as you get towards the end, an extraordinary thing happens because this is a busy site. There's lots of work, there's lots of noise, there's lots of dust, there's that dreaded pollen. But as you come towards the end of the build, the last 2 days, which is our assessing and judging, strange silence takes over as everybody, instead of being the great designer, the great diva, they all become very, very insular and kind of think, have I really done what I said I was going to do? Is it really as good as I hoped? What if nobody likes it? What if they think I'm hopeless? I'll never have a job again. So you go through all of this emotional roller coaster, and assessing and judging takes place. Now this bit I need to explain because we find ourselves always in trouble, and we shouldn't, because we should be very proud of it. So basically, a job of a judge or an assessor is really just to check that the designer did what they said they were going to do. It's really that basic. So if the designer tells us they've made a garden for one person, that's what we need to see. So if they've designed it with really wide paths and every designed indication that it's for two people, well, that's not really what they said they were going to do. And if they said there's going to be this amazing waft of lavender and all of these things, we kind of get really nervous because we don't want to know the subjective. We just want to know it's a Mediterranean scree. And then we can think, yes, it is. That's very true. So that's our first element. We're judging what they said. Have they made what they said? Then we have 9 criteria, all points-based. And we have assessors who are industry experts. They're invited by the society. They've done a huge career. You kind of look up to them. I still look up to them, and I'm kind of in their band. But I look up to them and think, crikey, you met Lanning Roper, who was a very famous American landscape architect, by the way. So because none of you know who he is, or, you know, they've met these extraordinary people who've done extraordinary things, and they know extraordinary things. So they will come, they meet the designer mumbles something at them because they're very stressed and not very coherent at this point. You always say something and wish you'd said something else, and leave scurryingly for a very strong coffee. And they look for at least half an hour, examine everything, make some notes, and the judges do the same thing, but they don't go on the garden at this stage. They're kind of wafting around in the background, always quite stylish. I was looking slightly nervous with these folders, writing things. Overnight, it all gets collaborated, and then the judges meet together on the Sunday now. It used to be Monday, but we like it Sunday now. So they meet on Sunday morning, and they assess the gardens. The assessor presents it to the judges and says, we met, in my case, we met Paul. He was an incoherent wreck, and we forgave him all of that. Or sometimes you might say something useful. My best analogy of this is that if something goes wrong, then the best way to get out of it is to say what an amazing opportunity it was. So often we see designers saying, oh, well, I've got this tree because the one I really wanted isn't here. Something awful happened to it. It's such a shame. We all feel slightly nervous and say, oh, no, that's awful, because now we're really nervous that you haven't actually said you've not done what you said. Whereas if they say, well, I did say I was going to have this copper beech, but actually I found this most amazing river birch, and it was so beautiful that I just had to have that. We're like, oh, amazing. That's a really good idea. I love that. So this is what happens. We have this whole massive discussion, and we judge over 9 criteria. So you have the brief, what they were going to say. You have the quality of the finish. So is it a really beautiful finished piece of work? So have they got lovely turf round? Have they got the cushions out? It demonstrates to us they had time and that their build went to plan and there was no headaches and no heartaches. So we assess that. And then we assess the 2-dimensional plan. This relates back to the brief in many ways. Not only is it coherent as a piece of planning, but if they've said this is a garden for an elderly couple who are mobility impaired, if everything's on the ground, you're not going to get a 70-year-old on their hands and knees. It needs to be up. So we look at that sort of thing. We look at the 3-dimensional layout. So is it coherent, the void and the mass across the space, or does it kind of disappear into an area of nothing that we don't understand? We look at the construction. We expect construction of these gardens to be exactly as they would be in the real world, because we don't want people coming to the show thinking they can achieve something which is unachievable. So we look at that, and then you'll be glad to know with a horticultural show our main emphasis will always be plants. So we first of all look at planting design. Is the design a beautiful piece of work, discounting the actual material used? So is the colour, the texture, the form, has it got rhythm? Is it exciting, or is it visually arresting? If you've said in your brief it's a calm, tranquil space, we don't want to see hot fuchsia pink because that's not really relaxing. And if you said it's like vibrant and beautiful and you're going to feel this kind of sense of tropical, and it's all white agapanthus, it's neither tropical nor exciting. So we look at that, and then we look at whether the plants actually will grow together, because this is really crucial. Nobody wants to see two plants that actually will never make good bedmates, because someone will do it at home and complain bitterly that it happened at Chelsea. So we look at all of this, and we get to a medal, and we have a little bit of a voting session, because there's always someone who thinks something different. That's the great luxury of judging. You hear other people's informed opinions. And then off go judges, comes back designers, everything's done, they're feeling quite relaxed, they're quite happy. The sponsor likes it, you've got over the main sponsor hurdle, where's the champagne fridge going? Everything's great. And then you kind of feel very nervous. I remember one year I had a fashion retailer as my sponsor, and they gave me a whole week's worth of clothes, which were all the wrong size. And when I tried to say about this, they said, just lose some weight. So so I was very immobile for a week. I was like, hello, how do you do? Can't really move. So you kind of have all this weird thing going on about what's going to happen over the week, briefing all of the investors team who are going to be there with you, talking about what the key plant's going to be, talking about how that identifies with the kind of brand association, making sure everybody is on the right page, we're all doing the right thing. And then you kind of prepare yourself for press day. You think, oh my gosh, it's going to be massively exciting. Everyone's going to love my garden. They're going to love my plants. They're going to love what I've done with this paving. Really odd that it turns out that what they really want to see is whether Joan Collins is going to turn up or which bench Joanna Lumley sat on. So we feel slightly disheartened at this point as designers. We're kind of like, oh, they didn't love my garden, but they did love Jennifer Saunders' shoes. And I'm really glad I put in 4 weeks worth of work. Because the build time, I should mention, if you're doing a big garden, it's 4 solid weeks. So you have to leave everything. Leave your home, your loved one, your dog, your cat, the lot. You're here, locked into it. And luckily for me this year, Artisan was only 8 days, so that was quite handy. But you go through this bizarre thing on press day of looking at weird people who are famous and somehow now treated very differently. If you're me, you manage to put your foot in it quite a lot, and you don't really know who the celebrity was, and you say the most awkward things to them, and they look at you with a kind of pity, which only a grandmother would do to an unfortunately looking child, really. It has the same kind of effect, like, oh God. So this is this day, and photographers come round, and journalists are there at the same time. They're kind of a mix, 50-50, between whether they say, is that really Melissa Aficionados? Oh, look who that is. So you have all this going on. They then leave. It's quite relieving in a way. They leave around midday, and we have the royal visit. So then the showground gets even emptier. It's even quieter because you don't really know if anyone's going to walk past. It's very nerve-wracking, actually, I think, to meet not one royal member, but quite a lot of them all at the same time, because you're never really sure what you should say. You don't know whether you should have a conversation or not. My mother, I think, had the best Chelsea conversation I have ever witnessed, where I had a sponsor and we were very good friends, and we knew we were having the Queen visit our garden. And we were both like, what do you say? I mean, there's quite an age gap between us. We can't really say, oh, yes, I don't know. So I said, let's get my mother to do it. She'll be really, really polite. She's old school. She knows the drill. So we all walk on, and we were together. They were behind us. My mum was like, it's lovely weather, isn't it? And the Queen said, yes, yes. She said, and do you enjoy Chelsea Flower Show? And my mum said, no. She said, no, I don't like it at all, really. She said, this is the worst possible day to come because nothing exciting happens. I really like it at the end when you can buy things. And I was just... the worst possible experience, which I've never let her live down. So it's quite extraordinary. You'll be glad to know that after all this trauma, stress, and all of these trials and tribulations, that most of us disappear to the nearest pub on Monday night and then stumble off home thinking that we've done it and it's all over and that's that. But of course it isn't, because Tuesday is when the medals come out and we forget that. And when the alarm goes off at 5:30 and you're bleary-eyed, you kind of think, oh, hang on, where am I? What was this? And you stumble off and you meet the sponsor who's looking remarkably fresh because they're just starting their week with it. And you stand waiting and then you see this kind of dreaded bundle of people travelling towards you at quite a lot of speed with lots of RHS bags flapping in the wind, and you know that something dreadful could happen or something amazing could happen. Normally they come equipped with a BBC presenter, and the cameraman tells you where you need to stand and you're going to be very natural. So basically they say, if you could just stand here, so you stand here, and they say, just another inch to your right, left, no, maybe there. Can you look like you're relaxed? And then they tell you what's going to happen. So they say, well, we're going to come along with the medal, we'll turn it round and you need to react, which I think is terribly dangerous. So they kind of set everybody up, at which point, because a camera flapping bags and a group of people seems to draw in the public like you could not imagine, suddenly there's like 500 people, like, what's happening? You're stood there with a piece of blue rope round you, looking relaxed, and Nicky Chapman comes running along with the show manager, and they say, so, on behalf of the Royal Horticultural Society, I'd like to present you with, and it is a little bit like Strictly Come Dancing, it's like, with, and everybody pauses first to get the camera into shot, make sure they've got your face ready to capture the moment, and then they turn it round. On a good day, they're going to say gold. On a bad day, it's going to be the letter saying, please don't come back. And then, weirdly, if you get gold, they kind of want this like jumping euphoria, and most of us are absolutely exhausted. And you kind of think, if I jump anywhere, my legs will just go through my pelvis. I can't do it. So you're kind of like, thank you. I'm just so relieved. And then, like, come on, can you be a bit more excited? And you think, you try building this for a month. See how excited you are. So you go through all of this, and then actually it kind of hits you once the caravan of bags and cameras have disappeared and everyone's around you very excited. It kind of hits you that actually it doesn't really matter what colour is on this piece of card. You've made something. And if you just turn around and look at it rather than having this procession of bizarre activity going on around you, that thing that was in your head, that thing that you then put on paper, that you kind of went to the world and said, this is my idea, and this idea really aligns with your core values, and if you give me £500,000, I'm going to make it for you. Suddenly all of that trial, all of that tribulation, it's behind you. It's a living, breathing entity. It's got birds flying through it. It's got insects around it. Plants are actually growing because you've taken them out of the pots and they're in the ground and they're doing their own thing. And people are beginning to inhabit it, and they're going to be in it, and they're going to feel all of the things that you thought would happen. And it is the most extraordinary feeling on earth that suddenly this amazing living structure is there. And it all started in your head with a pencil on a piece of paper. The great thing about that is that if you're very lucky, you end up convincing enough people that you're good at it, and they ask you back year on year. In my case, and I have the extraordinary achievement of 10 gold medals. And I can tell you, to just finish this story off, that for a boy who grew up in Oxford and grew potatoes on an allotment, 10 gold medals at the highest possible place to do it just kind of makes you think, wow, who did that? So thank you very much.